And I've got a short video that I'm going to play, and then I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Prem Sikka.
Today we've increased bank rate by 0.75 percentage points to 3%. This is the 8th consecutive increase in bank rate since December of last year. Well, quite simply, we're increasing bank rate because inflation is too high, and it's the bank's job to bring it down. People should not have to worry about inflation as they go about their daily business. That's why we've been raising interest rates and did so again today. Low and stable inflation is the bedrock of a stable economy, a predictable economy in which people can go about their lives and plan for their futures with confidence. An economy in which hard-earned money keeps its value. If we do not act forcefully now, it will be worse later on. And as the forecast we are publishing today shows, it is a tough road ahead. The sharp increase in energy prices caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine has made us poorer as a nation. The level of economic activity is likely to be flat and even fall for some time. But the economy will recover and inflation will fall. We cannot, I'm afraid, pretend to know what will happen to gas prices. That depends on the war in Ukraine. But from where we stand now, we think inflation will begin to fall back from the middle of next year, probably quite sharply.
It's crucial that we put our public finances on a sustainable footing to limit the increase in interest rates, because ultimately that is what puts pressure on people's mortgage payments. That's what this government is determined to do.
There you go, Prem. There's a video for you. It explains all about the economy. It says that the Bank of England's its job is to deal with inflation. That's what he said himself, and he's got to put interest rates up to reduce inflation. And although he also says the economy is going to be in recession for a long time, so he can't change that in any way. What is the Bank of England doing?
Well, good morning, Crispin and everyone else. Well, I don't think he knows what he's doing. Let's just think about the causes of inflation. People are not awash with money at the moment. Many people are just about surviving. We have a high rate of inflation primarily because of corporate profiteering. Whether you look at energy companies, water companies, gas, oil companies. I wrote last week in the newspaper explaining to people how Shell and BP haven't paid any corporation tax for the last 3 years, and they're not the only ones. So our inflation is caused by corporate profiteering on which there is zero control. No price control of any kind whatsoever. Government tells workers wages are inflationary, but apparently profiteering is not inflationary. Soar-away executive pay is not inflationary either, and so he doesn't really know what he's actually talking about in that sense. Let's just look at the logic of this increase in interest rate. What they are telling us is that we should pay banks more. Okay, so household debt is over £2 trillion in the UK. Each 1% increase in the borrowing rate results in about £20 billion extra that is paid to banks. And of course, many people are paying more than 1% extra. I explained on a previous show that I went to some pawnbroking shops just to see how the poor were managing. They were already paying 155% interest rate on what they were borrowing from pawn shops. So we pay money to banks. government tells us that it's for its debt, it will have to pay more interest. So the government shovels more money into banks. Banks' profits actually then soar. Bankers get higher bonus. And miraculously out of that, somehow we all become better off. It is the craziest policy you can actually think of. It is a plan to make a huge wealth transfer from hard-pressed people and many hard-pressed businesses to banks and bankers. So government has a huge capacity to create money. It has demonstrated that, for example, by creating £895 billion of quantitative easing, which is then handed to speculators. Just a few weeks ago, Kwarteng said, oh, magically 65 billion will be found to prop up pension funds. In the final event, the Bank of England only spent £19 billion. So they can create this money. Now, the problem is if the creation of that money is inflationary, then they can remove some of that through taxes. So when the government is increasing the interest rate, not a penny of that actually flows to the government. It should be improving government's finances. It does not actually do any of that. All it does is it enriches a few fat cats. So the government could create the money to give workers a decent wage. It could create money to fund public services. It could create money to start new industries. So the link Andrew Bailey is making between interest and inflation rate is simply not there. All that would happen is people will cut back on their discretionary expenditure. Hospitality industry will be the first one. People won't go on holidays. They won't go to a local cafe, restaurant. They will make clothes last longer, shoes last longer. Many people will go without food, go without heating. And somehow the government thinks that is a magic cure. That simply has never, ever worked. And it is just that eventually people, just give up. I mean, you were in the seminar I organized in Parliament with patriotic millionaires, and what they were saying was, even if the government took away a few billion from us in additional taxes, it won't really make any difference to our lifestyle because we are so rich. So those people are now sitting back, and what are they going to find? Their wealth has suddenly increased because share prices have gone up and the bank interest rates have gone up. So the government is making them rich and making the ordinary person incredibly poor. And this is absolutely no way whatsoever to run the economy. Just think about it. For the last 40 years, what have we had? We have had interest rates going up and down. We have had corporation tax rate reduced. We had taxes on the rich reduced. We have slashed public spending on public services. None of that has led to prosperity. None of that has led to contentment by the people. None of that has increased the resilience of household budgets. It is time to junk all of that. And we really need a realistic kind of politics based upon public investment, based on redistribution, because that is the only path to growth. Governments which do that have done pretty well, and Scandinavian countries are a good example of that. Countries where the state takes a leading role in investment do pretty well. Just look at how China is growing on the back of such state investment, or India is growing, and even the US. We have people in Parliament who tell us US government does not intervene. Then I remind them they spend £800 billion on defense, vast amount on space exploration and many other things. All that is a form of public investment in the economy from which the private sector benefits as well. Whereas we are not doing any of that. And this is a fundamental failure. So interest rates hikes will just increase mortgage payments, rent payments, food prices, all other costs. And people at the bottom of the pile, plus even middle income families, are the ones who are going to suffer.
So I just want to clarify that. I mean, what do you think this Andrew Bailey, this Bank of England man? I mean, is he just a front for the government and sort of making out that it's all these bankers and economists with expertise are leading to this decision? It's nothing to do with the government. This kind of, instead of saying actually we can't help with inflation, he's making out that they can. Is it a big con? Is this Bank of England at the front of our fiscal policy or whatever? Is that a con?
I think it is. I mean, you look at what the Truss government was claiming. It was saying that by freezing the average household energy bill for a couple of years, they were saying as a result of that, inflation will dip by 4 to 5%. Well, if that does the trick, why not extend it? Why not control profiteering? And that is not what £500,000 a year Andrew Bailey is advocating, because he's okay. So it is really something which doesn't work. But let me just sort of just come to my head. Let's just go back about 40 years. Margaret Thatcher had an academic advisor. His name was Sir Alan Budd. He was an economist. Some people may well recall it. Some years after leaving Thatcher's government, he gave an interview, and people asked him, so how was the government trying to control inflation? And he gave a very interesting response. He said, well, they actually talked about it controlling inflation, but the real mission probably was to destroy the working class and trade unions and weaken them so that capital could continue to make high profits. So Andrew Bailey may well be the front, and the talk about controlling inflation is just a kind of a distraction. The real mission in the government is really to turn the UK into a shell-stacking, low-wage economy and let corporations basically make bigger profits, because these people believe that is how countries prosper. But there isn't any, much evidence to support any of that. And I think we have now reached a limit. And indeed, a few weeks ago, I joined Fuel Poverty demonstrators in London. And I think more and more people just need to take to the streets, because they're not going to get much change out of Parliament. I'm sad to say I agree with what earlier speakers said. Parliament at our state is increasingly now disconnected from the lived experiences of the people. And that is really a fundamental crisis.
Wow. I never thought you'd say get on the street.
I've been in the streets, and in my youth, when I was a bit more mobile, I did that more often, marching against the National Front, BNP, because people like me were targeted by them. And you had to take to the streets simply to survive. And I think we are getting to that stage now. There are many people who are just struggling to survive. Let's understand, this country is not poor. Let me just give you some stats, which I put in the chat line, a link to an article I've written this week. Since 2010, HMRC admits that it has failed to collect over £400 billion of taxes due to avoidance, evasion, fraud, error, etc. That estimate is grossly understated. My and other people's estimate is that the number is about £1,500 billion. Okay, government admits that between 29 and 51 billion pound a year is lost due to fraud in government departments. You multiply that by 12 years, and you can see how enormous amounts have vanished down the plug hole. Some 219 billion pound of the COVID expenditure of about 387 billion is said to be at very high risk of fraud. Why is the government not chasing the money trail, tracking down who's got the money? Money doesn't vanish into thin air. It's gone to, billions like that haven't disappeared in suitcases. They're gone to a bank account somewhere. Government can chase, but they don't. So we had a real episode in the Lords early this year that that the minister responsible for chasing fraud resigned live in the Lords, saying that the government, that the Treasury was not serious about going after these lost monies. So that is how much, people can add more. Just gives you a glimpse of what has been wasted. Then government itself can raise billions through closing tax abuses and perks for the rich. I have said many times that by simply taxing capital gains at the same rate as earned income and charging national insurance on it, we can make extra £25 billion a year. Nurses can be paid easily, can be given inflation matching salaries. We can increase the state pension. We can do many things. That is just one example. Then there is financial transaction tax, a wealth tax. We can tax dividends in the same way as we do earned income. We are paying about 80 to 100 billion pound a year in dividends to investors abroad who pay zero tax in the UK, zero, none. So there is plenty there. It is just that we don't have the political will, and that is why I was saying I really think it is about class warfare. That is what this government is really engaged in. And we can see that at many fronts, not just on the financial front. Just look at, what they are trying to do to trade unions. So that is evident. So our state is now far removed from the concerns of everyday people, and this crisis will deepen.